Hi everyone, Michael Britt here. Now, I'm very proud that the Psych Files podcast has been so successful. It passed the 20 million download mark. And a lot of that success is due to my episodes on how you can use proven memory strategies to remember just about anything, from memorizing terms for a test to remembering people's names at a party or a meeting. So, I've put all of these episodes into one audio course. Hippos, aliens, and llamas quickly master the tricks to a great memory. And it's available now on avid.fm/memorymaster. All one word. Michael Britt here. Welcome to the Psych Files. It seems that the battle cry of childhood is, "It's not fair." No doubt you're familiar with this. You don't have to be a parent to know that one of the things that kids constantly say is that it's not fair. And it's a strange thing because we know as adults that the world's not a fair place, and yet we all agree that we use fairness so much in working with children and helping them to resolve their conflicts. How many times do we say when one child complains about another, the toys, he took my toys, it's my turn, that we turn to the solution of, well, you'll have it for 5 minutes and she'll have it for 5 minutes and that'll be fair. I mean, we do grow out of that. I think as adults we know the world's not fair, and yet we still look for it, expect it, and hope for it. Well, this reminds me, this obsession that we have with fairness. And by the way, I think that for children, I do think that sometimes they just cry about unfairness because they don't know, they don't have the verbal skills to really explain what is not right about the situation. So sometimes I think it has to do with fairness. Other times I think it just has to do with their inability to really explain the complexities of the conflict between the two. In any case, the reason why I'm drawn to this, apart from hearing about fairness all the time, is that there is a theory in psychology called equity theory. We find it most often discussed in talking about motivation, but also about emotions as well. Because how does unfairness make us feel? Particularly at the workplace, whenever we see unfairness or perceived unfairness, which is really all that we need. Whether a situation is truly fair or unfair, we don't really know. It's what we think is fair or unfair. That's the key. The thing I like about equity theory is that it's also one that lends itself to a quantitative analysis. Now, most people associate psychology with pretty mushy stuff. Theories that are, discussions of ephemeral concepts like self-esteem. Where is self-esteem? Is that 3 inches into the brain on the right-hand side and 5 inches in? I mean, who knows where any of these strange concepts are held? But we can use formulas to make some predictions about how you might feel or how you might act when you perceive unfairness. Okay, so let's just take, for example, 2 common situations, and we can go with the situation at work. So, let's say you get yourself out of college and or out of high school, and you go get your job, and we think usually of, okay, I'm going to get a job, and I'm going to get paid a certain amount of money. And is that enough? Now, just as a sidelight, I remember the first job that I was offered with my degree in psychology. I had a bachelor's degree in, this was back in the early 80s, and the first job offer I had was a yearly salary working at a group home as a counselor for $8,900 a year. And of course that number sticks in my mind. I was just taken aback. It was one of those sticker shocks that you get when you graduate from college and realize that, holy mackerel, some people came out of college, of course, and especially in the early 80s, and they had degrees in computers, and they did quite well in their salaries with some of the larger computer manufacturers. they had quite good salaries at that time. I remember a friend of mine who had her degree in computers, and her first job offer paid around $30,000. So there's an amazing and weird thing that college graduates have to deal with, is that this fact that people in different fields, of course, are paid a variety of salaries depending upon what our society tends to value. And I remember asking, wouldn't I get a little more money because I had a college degree? And I was told that it might be worth a few $100s more. I didn't take that position, eventually did get a better position, paying the whopping yearly salary of $12,000. So, as I say, early 80s, and then about a year later, I was had a small promotion, was making about $14,000. Amazing when I look back at that. Anyway, so we tend to think of our jobs maybe a little bit simply in that, okay, I come to my job and I have certain qualifications, and then, of course, I get pay back. Okay, it's a little bit more complex than that, in that you do come to the job with certain things, certain what we call inputs. In equity theory, they're called inputs. So you have some qualification, you have a high school degree, you have a college degree, you have some training, you have some job experience. Think of all the things you put on a typical resume. You might have a background in some specific skill. Maybe you know Microsoft Office, or you know some HTML, or you know a certain computer language, or maybe you can type so many words a minute, etc. So there's all those things that you put on your resume, and we call those inputs. And those are the things you look at. You say, okay, here's what I come with. And then there's what your pay is. But the jobs also give you more than pay, right? They give you job title, which may mean very little, but some job titles are supposed to mean something. The longer your job title gets, I guess the more important you are. Your job may come with an office, be large or small, right? Larger offices seem to imply something more important about you. You may have a company card given to you. Maybe you have certain number of days off. You have certain number of sick days, right? There's actually a lot of outputs that your job gives you in addition to just pay. So the first kind of equity crisis that we deal with is we look at this kind of comparison. What do I bring to the job, and what does it give me? So let's just give some numbers to that, because this is what's been done in psychological research. So, but we'll just do it a little bit more broadly and just say that you bring in, let's say, something like 50. We'll just throw that out as a number. All of your experience and credentials and your skills add up to something. You have 50 inputs. Now, ideally, you get a job that you think pays, that's, as they say, commensurate with all that. And let's say you get a pay and a benefits package that also adds up to about 50. Now that's good. In terms of equity theory, that's good. That's equal. And the resulting number there of a fraction of 50 over 50 is, of course, 1. And so you have, probably you are satisfied. So equity, being in an equitable, that's a hard word to say, being in an equitable situation results probably in you being satisfied and in you being sufficiently motivated to do your job well. Okay, all's well and good there. Now, to the extent that you are paid, let's say in my situation, I thought I brought, let's say, 50 to a job interview, and a salary of $8,900 a year was definitely what I considered to be less than 50 of an output. So let's say that's probably something like 30. Right? It's significantly lower than I thought I might get. And even in the early 80s, you really couldn't, I don't even think you could get an apartment and, live decently on $9,000 a year. So there I was, with a 50 in the denominator and a 30 in the numerator. Right? Probably would be good as a video episode, but I think we can all sort of picture that fraction, 30 on the top, 50 on the bottom, not so good. And so what can I do? There's actually a couple of things. And again, this is how the mathematics works into this. How do you make that into a 1? right? The same number in the top and the bottom. Well, if I have 50 on the inputs, I could obviously go and get a better job, which is what I did, although I was still even making $12,000 a year didn't make me feel like I had a 50-50, but at least, that was something I had to live with. So, I mean, how do you resolve this? You either go get yourself a better paying job, which is to raise the numerator up to something that's 50. So maybe at the time, if I had made 20 or 25, I guess I might have thought that was a pretty good salary. Okay, but then you also do the mental machinations in there. Let's say you can't find that job. You can't find the 50 on the bottom, 50 on the top. So what you can do is either, let's see, I can't raise the top number, can't get more money. I guess I could do a sort of a mental gymnastics here. I could say to myself, well, it's not much pay. That's true. But the hours are flexible. So now I start to convince myself that the outcomes from the job make it more valuable. Maybe so much as a 40 or maybe even a 50, depending upon how far I can go in convincing myself that this is a good, fair situation that I'm in. So maybe the hours are flexible. Maybe we tell ourselves, well, when I think about it, I don't really have much experience. So now I'm going to go from my 50 on the bottom down to like a 40 on the bottom. So I'm going to just do this kind of thought process that's going to wind up in me deciding that maybe it's a 40-40 thing. Maybe it's really kind of fair, right? Because it's so hard to live with an unfair situation. Makes me think back on the whole cognitive dissonance thing. It's hard to live with contradiction. And in this case, we have this unfair thing. I'm working so hard and I've got so many credentials and the pay is so bad. So I think for a while we do play this little mind game and we tell ourselves that, well, I don't have much experience and, I do have flexible hours and I work with great people. That's the thing. I love the people I work with, which is either true or it's something I tell myself. And I think the only way you'll know for sure is how long you tell yourself these things and how long it satisfies you. If you stay at that job, and at least as far as the money is concerned, there's not much change. The problem is after a couple of more years, that experience thing's not going to work anymore because now you do have experience. You've been working at this job for a while. But if the flexible hours, maybe you have children and the flexible hours now becomes actually a good thing. So it can work out, and maybe the people you work with really are pretty good people. So it can work out in reality, or it can work out in your brain. If it's a mind game, you'll know it because after a little while, what you say to yourself doesn't work anymore. And you'll realize, you know what, I really am unhappy. And that is what inequity does to us. It makes us unhappy. And so it results in that emotion, and it results in some motivation, a motivation to change. Okay, so that's when I compare just me. The other thing, though, that we do, especially if we're caught in a funny situation here, where things are not quite so equitable, the other thing we do is compare ourselves to the other people. It could be the other people in our organization, typically because we run into them a lot. Although, of course, you also tend to compare yourself to relatives and other people that you know. But let's just start with people in the organization. So let's say you're 50-50. So it's got to the point where the job's okay and you feel that you have certain experience and skills, credentials, and your pay is commensurate with that, and you got a pretty good situation, 50-50. Now, if you look at other people in the organization, as we always do, that's what we do. We are social comparison type of species. We just take a look at other people. And we also check out then what is their fraction like. What is their deal like? So you look at the other guy in the next office, or the other person, the woman in the next office, and you sort of size up. Well, does she have the same degree as I do? Does she have the same experience? Does she have sort of the same training behind her, same skills? So you measure up, and let's say you find someone. What's particularly unnerving is when you find someone who you believe has the same denominator as you, that same 50, let's say. But you find out, or for some reason you perceive, that instead of getting the 50 outcomes that you're getting, that person's getting 100. Maybe they're getting paid more than you are. Of course, you're going to feel upset about that. You're going to feel dissatisfied. You can be motivated to do something. Okay, well, what? So in other words, I'm 50-50, and the other person's deal is, let's say, 100 in the numerator and 50 in the denominator. What can I do? Well, I can, of course, try to raise my numerator, right? I can try to get more money. So I go to my boss, and I say, so-and-so has been here as long as I have, has the same credentials. I understand he or she is getting paid more, and I think I deserve that level of pay. So that is one thing you can do, and maybe you're successful. Certainly we've seen that in the newspapers where we find out that when women find out that they are being paid less than men in the organization who have the same kinds of inputs, but they're getting paid more. And so you can, of course, first try to address that situation non-legally, but often many people turn to the law in order to get fairness back. So you can try to raise your numerator either by getting more pay or you can look at other things. Bigger office, flexible hours, all of those kinds of outputs that you get from the organization maybe could be even more valuable to you than the pay. So you try to go, if the other person has what you perceive to be 50, 100, or 100 in the numerator and 50 in the denominator, then you can try to get that same 100 to 50. Suppose you can't get more money. That avenue doesn't work, and you're not going to go legal avenues. So what are you going to do? You've got 50-50, the other person's got 150. Well, you could lower your denominator. Bring it down to something like 25. In other words, work less. So you obtain this fair or equal fractions. So you can, of course, change your credentials or the number of years experience you have, but you can change how hard you work, how much you bring to the organization. You can also find yourself getting sick more often, right? Taking personal days or extra days. But in whatever ways, you are decreasing what you bring to the organization because you perceive an inequity. Okay, so if you bring your denominator down to 25, now you've got 25 and 50. The other person has 50 and 100, and, well, at least it's equitable. Probably that situation won't work out too long, but that's what we do, right? Okay, now, suppose you can't work less hard. Maybe you would jeopardize the job entirely, so you can't work less hard because you might get fired. Maybe you work in a situation, a kind of assembly line situation, where you can't work less hard. The amount of work that comes to you cannot be avoided. Right? Okay, so now what do? You've got 50-50, let's say, and the person's got a 50-100. Well, you could try to bring down that person's 100. I don't know how you would do that, though. You can't decrease the other person's pay. So that's a problem. But what else does the 100 stand for that person? The 100 stands for their pay, but also all the other things that they get from the organization, like the size of the office, the flexible hours, the benefits, but also the atmosphere that the person works with. You could try to make the work environment less pleasing for that person. So you decrease the 100, try to make the 100 down to a 50 by talking less to that person, making just in some subtle ways, trying to make their work life less enjoyable. And you could turn to very outright things like bullying and stuff like that. That's probably will get you into other kinds of trouble. But you could see this kind of situation can see the kind of anger that could result in that perceived inequity. The other thing you could do if you cannot raise your outputs is if you look over and say, well, that person's got 100 on the top and 50 on the bottom. Well, I'm going to make that person work harder. Try to raise the other person's denominator. So you leave work for that person to do. Right? You don't do things you might have done, which then result in that person having to do those things. So now you're going to make them work harder to the point where maybe now they have to put in the 100 and 100. So, your sort of agenda there is that, well, I'm not going to get that kind of pay, but at least I don't have to work as hard as I'm going to make that person work because I'm not going to do those jobs. By not doing certain work and leaving that work for the other person to do, you're sort of adjusting both of those. You're lowering your inputs and you are increasing the other person's inputs. Equity theory really rings true. And, in psychology, we study this and assign numbers to things and ask people, what do they think about this and that? And it becomes very quantitative. We run correlations and all kinds of other sorts of statistical tests on it. But I just thought it was interesting just to let those of you who think that maybe psychology is all about talking about your mother or other kinds of squishy, mushy, touchy-feely concepts, that it's not always that way. And there's equity theory for you. Kind of interesting theory. All right, well, there you go. That's today's episode. I hope you found this interesting. Perhaps in your drive to work, you can turn those ideas around as you think about your own job. Feel free to come to the site, www.thepsychfiles.com. See you next time on the Psych Files. One last thing, remember to check out my memory course. You can use these strategies to get better grades on your tests, to remember people's names, and even help you to remember those jokes you keep forgetting. So you will be amazed. avid.fm/memorymaster. That's avid, AVID.fm/memorymaster. Thanks.